Today, we're going to go over the best all-wheel drive cars for your money under 6K. I'm even going to show you some examples to show you that they're real on Facebook Marketplace and on Craigslist, so you can really get scammed, but do it virtually, so you don't even have to go see the car in person before you lose all your money. I'll break it into, I think, three categories, which would be good. Modern SUVs with all-wheel drive for this money, older options, 80s and 90s, and not that old, but that's when all-wheel drive cars were being more mainstream, and modern wagons with all-wheel drive. To kick us off, let's start with SUVs. Maybe you're a middle-aged soccer mom who occasionally goes on snowy roads, or maybe, with COVID, rents were rising and you were just evicted, and now you need a portable crack house that can go off-road. These all-wheel drive SUVs are for you. I've got some options for you. All right, let's start with SUVs, and we'll work our way towards what I think are the best ones. All of these are pretty good options. I'll just finish off with the top three. Let's start with the Toyota Highlander and the Lexus RX 330. These are the same cars. These are pretty good cars. They're pretty reliable. Just make sure that if it's a V6 model on the Highlander or the RX 330, I think they're all V6s, that has had the timing belt replaced. The V6s in these are pretty bulletproof. These are pretty good cars, even if the Lexus is pretty ugly. In my opinion, it's pretty ugly. But they're a decent car to thrash. You can get them for pretty cheap. Just watch out for oil burning if you get the four-cylinder Highlander. All right, moving on to the Acura MDX. These are pretty underrated and pretty cool cars. You just need to make sure you get the right one. If you're a soccer mom, this car is for you. It screams your name. But jokes aside, they are pretty good. If you can find one in good nick, they'll last a really long time, and they're decent off-road, especially the second generation. There are two generations you can afford for your budget, the first and the second gen. I'll put the years up here. The best one is the second gen from 2007 to 2009. It has a better all-wheel drive system. Don't get a later one. I think they had some oil burning issues. And for the first gen, try and get one that was built after 2004 to avoid transmission issues. All right, next one is the Toyota Matrix and the Pontiac Vibe. These were offered with all-wheel drive. Although honestly, I think they're kind of lame in all-wheel drive because they only had an automatic, not super powerful. They're decent and reliable, pretty unkillable. If I were you, I would just get a manual XRS, Toyota Matrix SRS, or the Pontiac Vibe GT. This came with the engine, same engine that went in the Lotus Elise, and you can get it with a manual. It revs up super high. It's got like 180 horsepower. Just even though it's only front wheel drive, get one of these with snow tires and chains, you'll be fine. But if you really need all wheel drive, the Matrix and the Vibe offer that. All right, next up is the Toyota RAV4. These are great cars. You can get it in a manual and with all wheel drive for the first and second generation. That's pretty rare though. But cool. It's not a luxury cruiser, but it's reliable, efficient. Watch out for oil burning on the second gen 2.4 liter, so it's a four-cylinder. Even if it burns oil, it'll still probably run a long time. It's just something to be conscious of. You do have to constantly check out your oil. It's the same thing that was in the Highlander, the four-cylinder Highlander. In my opinion, the best one to get out of these would be the third gen RAV4 with the V6. It's the same V6 that was in, I think, the Toyota Sienna and a bunch of other cars after 2007. It's a 3.5 liter V6. These are really good engines. If you can get one with all-wheel drive under 6K, that's a great deal. They will run forever. And they had timing chains, so you didn't need to replace the timing belt. All right, in third place, I'm going to give it to the Honda Element. These are awesome cars. They have a cult classic. They're ugly as fuck, but they're really good cars. They're like little toaster ovens, and you can fit virtually anything into it. You can sleep in it. It has as much cargo space as pretty much a full-size SUV. You can turn it into a micro camper. You could put a fridge, a couch, and a small motorcycle in it and still park in a compact space. You can get these with all-wheel drive in a manual. I've seen one for under 6K, but it's super rare. It's super rare. So you'd have to set some sort of alert on Craigslist to find it. I would just settle for an all-wheel drive one if you need one, or just a manual. You can find both. That's awesome. All right, in second place, this might surprise people. You might never have heard of this one, but it's the Suzuki SX4. This is hands down the best value for your money in this price range, in my opinion. If you have the money, get a nice Element or CRV or RAV4, but these are always available and actually reliable. Bonus or a negative, no one's going to know what this is. Depending on what type of person you are, this could be a bonus. It could be a detractor. You can get one with a stick shift with all-wheel drive, and apparently it handles pretty well. And there are plenty of people have turned these into like little mini camping rigs or off-road, overlanding rigs. I know everyone will laugh at me, but this really is the best value for the money. For 6K, you could even get one with like 100,000 miles. Last actual car that are a good deal nowadays, because nobody's ever heard of them, and you can get almost 30 mpg with it. All right, in first place, I'm going to give it a tie. It's between a Honda CRV, the first and second generation, and the Mercedes ML series. The CRV, I think it's above the Element because it has a card table, obviously, in the back, which some people don't know, which is pretty cool. You can get these with a stick shift. You can get them with all-wheel drive for under 6K, and these are just like the Element. They're unkillable. They just cost a little bit less. It has space, gets decent MPG, it's decently safe, and pretty much mechanically unkillable. Now, the reason I tied it is because the other option here is more of like an off-road version and actually really reliable if well taken care of. It's the ML series. There was the ML320, the ML430, and the ML500, which has a lot of horsepower. These are all good engine options as long as they were serviced correctly, right? It's a Mercedes. It's a complicated vehicle, needs a lot of work. But if taken care of, they're quite reliable. So if you could find an older person or some couple or a car that's only had one or two owners and is well taken care of, you can find these all day for under 6K. You can get them with the 4MATIC system, which is great, and it's a body-on-frame vehicle. So one of the issues with going off-road with any of these cars I've mentioned before is they have a unibody frame. What that means is if you're going off-road, the frame can twist, and that's not a good thing. You don't want that on a body-on-frame, which is in most like full-size trucks. An SUV, the body is attached separately to the frame, as I understand it. So, if you're doing all sorts of articulations and stuff, the car is going to do better. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. And these are luxurious. They have decent off-road clearance. There's even an aftermarket community, and it's just plain cool. So I tied it, even though these are like diametrically opposed cars. The CRV is very much the practical option. The ML is not practical, but it's awesome. So that's why they're tied. All right, now we're going to switch gears into our vintage, yes, option. Even though these aren't even that old, they're only like from the 80s and 90s. All-wheel drive still is a newer thing. So you're really not going to find cars for this price point past 80s and 90s. I don't know when the Audi invented all-wheel drive, but it wasn't that long ago. There's no real particular order for these, but I'll start with the first gen Mercedes 4MATIC wagon. I think these were sold in the late 80s, early 90s. These are really cool, older cars. They had some problems with transfer case and the all-wheel drive system, so you have to make sure that's been serviced. But if it has, if you want to live the Albanian lifestyle and submit to Slavcore, buy this car. They're rare and they're hard to find, but it's not impossible to find one for under 6K. All right, next up, probably the most practical option here is older Subaru Outbacks Legacies with the EJ22, the 2.2 liter inline four. This is probably the best option because they're still around. It's hard to call it, vintage, but most of these have had really hard lives. Unlike the later Subaru engines, the EJ2025, sorry, these didn't have the same head gasket issues, and they can run over 300,000 miles if they're well taken care of. So if you can find a good, well taken care of Subaru with this engine, they're really good cars. The next is the legendary Toyota Corolla or Tercel All-Track. If you need to be like Jesse,
we have to cook.
This was a car that Jesse Pinkman had in Breaking Bad, and it's just fucking cool. It's just a cool car. That's all there is to say about it. Another one that's pretty similar to this is the Civic Wagon RT4 wheel drive. It's freaking sweet. Also vintage, boxy, 80s, 90s design, but these are super rare. Either of these cars, if you could find them, they're awesome, but you're going to be working on them. Same with the next one, Toyota Previa. You could get these with all-wheel drive. You could get them with a manual. You could get them with a supercharger. It's a mid-engined, supercharged Toyota van. I mean, what's not to like? You can't get all of these. You can't get a manual with a supercharger with all-wheel drive, but they are really cool, practical vans. All right, last but not least, let's talk about wagons, baby. Everybody loves wagons. Without a lift, these are not going to be the most capable, but they're probably the best all-rounders, and they can be decent off-road if you lift them for most small trails. All right, let's start and work our way to the best ones. Let's start with a stock WRX or a Saab 92X Aero. Saab had a rebadged version of the WRX. These WRXs, I think they're like first gen in the USA, or the Bug Eye, if you will, or Hawkeye ones. These are really good. They're really good cars, but today, not so much. Most of them have been totally modded by a 13-year-old who knows more about Xboxes than cars, and they've been tuned to hell and blown up. If you can find a stock one that hasn't been modified, I mean, that's like finding Atlantis. It's probably not going to happen, but they don't have the same head gasket issues. So if you find one that's taken care of, they'll go, 250, 300,000 miles. This is a turbocharged engine. It's a performance car, if you want us to call it that. It's going to take, more maintenance than your average car. So these are super cool if you can get one unmodified, but I really would stay away from this, especially if you have a small budget. These are super risky. They had less head gasket problems than the EJ25, but you need to make sure it's been meticulously maintained. Some of the earlier models last 200,000 to 300,000 miles, but most of these have been more abused than Michael Vick's pit bulls, so just beware of that. All right, number 5 on our list is the BMW 325xi. You might not be expecting me to say this, but this is BMW's E46. I think that's what it is. Model lineup. These were pretty cool cars and pretty decent. They got a lot of hate, but some of them are pretty good. As long as you replace the cooling system, you could get a wagon, you could get a manual, all-wheel drive BMW, which is pretty cool. I don't think they look the greatest, but they don't look awful. They're kind of rare. They're pretty reliable if you know what you're doing. All right, number 4, Volvo XC70s. These get overlooked a lot, but they are pretty legendary, at least in Sweden and in Europe. In the US, most of them get abused as fuck and don't make it that long. But if they are maintained, if the hull deck, which is their all-wheel drive system, fluid has been maintained and replaced along with the transmission fluid, these can last a really long time. If you buy one of these, you just need to make sure that you buy it from a Swedish grandma. And if you do, it should last longer than you can say. All right, number 3, any Audi wagon or hatchback with either the 3.2 V6 or the 3.2 VR6. These are really good cars. A lot of people don't know about them. And similar with the Volvo, these need to have maintenance. With a 3.2 V6 that came in the Audi A4 and the Audi A6, you need to make sure that these have been maintained. And I would watch out with these because at some point they're probably going to have their timing chains replaced. So if you can find one of these that has had the timing chain replaced, they're pretty legendary. They can last a long time and they look sweet. The 3.2 VR6 came only in the Audi A3, and it's pretty much a Volkswagen R32, which is a pretty cool sports car. These have a lot of pep, but as I mentioned before, it is an Audi, so it's going to take higher maintenance. But if you do get them, they will last a long time. Another thing to note is that the Audi A4 with the 3.2 came in wagon and came within manual. These are super rare, but very cool if you can find one. The automatic transmission on these is really good, though, so you don't have to worry about them. These are sleepers. Just make sure that the maintenance has been done. All right, number 2, the Mercedes 4MATIC wagon. I mentioned this earlier with the first generation. The second generation is way better and had way less problems. I had a family member who had one that had like 280,000 miles on it. As long as you maintain these, just like any really European vehicle, it'll last a lot longer than they usually do in the US. You could get these with a 3.2 V6 or a 5-liter V8. Both are great engine options. Obviously, one of them is going to be a little bit more economical than the other, but I mean, you could get one of these that's been decently well maintained for like 3-4 grand, maybe even less. You could spend the rest of your money and turn it into like an overlanding safari vehicle if you wanted to. Put a lift on it, put some bigger tires. I mean, these are really cool. Just watch out for the air suspension in the rear. I think some of them, if not all of them, had aromatic suspension and that can fail and leak. So I think you can convert it to coilovers or to regular coils. All right, number one. This might surprise people, that Subaru hasn't been on this list more often. There's a reason for that. If you get most Subarus that have the EJ25 4-cylinder, most of them had head gasket issues. So that's why it hasn't come up on this list more often. I want to, be mindful that you don't want to have to replace head gaskets, replace timing belts. That costs a lot of money, and unless you can find one that has had both of those things done, I would avoid them unless you know how to do it yourself and you got a really good deal. I mean, they're good cars otherwise, but that's a pretty big barrier of entry. So number one is any 6-cylinder Subaru. So this is the 3.0. They call it the H6 or the 3.6, which they made put in the Outbacks after 2010. These are really good cars. Getting one that's 2010 to 2014, those are awesome, but they're probably going to be out of budget. My mom actually owned one of these. This was my first car, was a 2004 Subaru 3-liter, and I just rode the piss out of that thing. I got it to go over 130 miles in a closed course, of course. I took it off-road. I even had to get it rescued by search and rescue because we were 12 miles up like a snowmobiling trail and weren't able to turn around. Anyway, took me to some really stupid places that I should have been able to go, but awesome, pretty legendary cars. They don't have head gasket issues. They have a timing chain. These will last, 250, 300,000 miles if they're taken care of. They do take premium gas, but they are really good cars and can go anywhere. All right, bonus round. This one's for you dreamers. These are cars that you may be able to get stretching your budget of 6K or find one that are in shitty condition. I mean, the chances of you finding these cars are like the chances of finding an affordable house nowadays. Outlook, not good. Jokes aside, you may be able to get lucky and get one of these. You have to set alerts. Some people sell cars. They have no idea what they are. They don't know the value. They're just upgrading to another car and they're trying to get rid of their old car. The first one I would go over is the ML series, but the diesel one. These are pretty cool. If you need to tow, if you need to get like 25, 30 miles a gallon and you also want to tow, these are really good. You just got to watch out, just like all European cars, right? I keep saying it needs to be really well maintained. These were the same engines that they had in Sprinters, even in the Jeep Grand Cherokee that I mentioned in the last video. They have known issues that need to be treated. Otherwise, it could lead to the demise of this engine. Do not buy one of these unless you're a diesel mechanic that has been thrashed. Next, Toyota Venza. These are as legendarily boring as they are reliable. Most people keep them, forever. And when they sell them, they probably don't know that they're worth that much. It's pretty hard to find these under 6K that have all-wheel drive, but these are great cars. In that vein, kind of a similar car is the Infiniti EX35, EX37, QX50, pretty much any of the Infinitis. If you can get these for under 6K with a clean title, they're great cars. It's a great platform, and they're pretty quick. Next is a BMW 5 or 3 series. After the E46, they still made wagons with manuals, with all-wheel drive, but finding one of these is just going to be pretty much impossible. All right, if you're really a sadist and you're a Volvo diehard enthusiast and you don't mind paying or working on it yourself, a Volvo V70R, there's a sedan version of this called the S60R. These are awesome cars. They have 300 horsepower. You can get them with a stick shift, with all-wheel drive. I would just recommend you stay away from these unless you're familiar with them or it's your second car. They have a lot of known issues, so watch out for that. Another good option is a Volvo XC60 with the T6 powertrain. These are really good cars. They have a lot of power. You can tune them. You can find them sometimes for under 6K, but they've probably been pretty high miles, but they're pretty reliable cars. And then also the XC70 with the T6 is a pretty awesome combination of a wagon with ground clearance with twin turbocharger. I mean, how cool is that? And they're pretty reliable, actually. Another Volvo option, I can't believe I'm saying this because I never really knew anything about Volvos before, but it's a V50. You can get a V50, it's a wagon you can get with all-wheel drive. and with a manual. Ford was working with, I think, Mazda at the time, so it's all on the same platform. These are really cool cars. You're not going to find one under 6K, though, honestly, unless it has a salvage title. All right, last but not least is the Toyota Sienna all-wheel drive. These are like the GOAT. It can do it all. And probably most likely out of all these to be under 6K, but they get swooped up quick. So just set alerts, and some people sell them not knowing their worth. Good luck out there. Let me know if I missed anything, and let's add to the list.